San Francisco during the worst of the AIDS years was no picnic, but some incredible art came out of it, and no community was more impacted from the artistic point of view than the dance community. Tonight, we meet some people who've made an incredible film about that time, director Chris Marlowe Johnson and Scott Marlowe, and the film is Test. And I just messed up your name already, I apologize.
That's all right.
Tell
Chris
me about,
Mason Johnson.
there you go. Tell me about the film Test.
Well, it's set in 1985 in this dance company. Scott's a dancer in the company. And it's those very early years before people had hard facts about anything. There's a lot of uncertainty, and it's a very young group of dancers, and they're very frightened, and they're not very verbal. They don't talk about what's happening, which is, I think, something you might be used to from other movies that have addressed the subject. Very articulate men in their 30s and 40s. These are 20-year-old kids who are petrified and are silent.
Yeah. I mean, I was one of those 20-year-old kids in 1985 in San Francisco, and I wasn't a dancer, but I was petrified. What is it like trying to portray that? I call it the darkest years of the AIDS epidemic in San Francisco, because it was with us, but you didn't know if you had it, and you didn't know how to get it, and if you were going to get the test, you were scared to get it.
And it was a death sentence.
It was a death sentence.
Well, I was too young at that time to really be aware of what was going on. My awareness came really further along in the course of events with ACT UP and around a culture of treatment and prevention. So it took a lot of speaking to friends, speaking to family. I talked to my mom and my aunt, and they told me some personal stories from the time. I watched a few movies to kind of get an idea of what it must have felt like, and then really, you know, Chris kept using the phrase, like the monster looming in the wings. Like it felt like this terrifying thing that nobody was talking about, but was just right there all the time. So really trying to feel that, what that must have been like.
I mean, the common word is denial. There was this period, but it's such a cliche, we tend not to hear it. But if you think about what that word means sort of viscerally, psychologically, instead of, you know, then it's a really terrible concept. It means, you know, literally there's something so powerful and overwhelming and frightening that you need to pretend it doesn't exist.
Right. And that period, I mean, I find the period fascinating because I was probably your age at that point, and I knew a lot of people in the dance community, and people were dying, and people were getting sick, and you didn't know how. I mean, there were still questions about how it was transmitted, and there were many people I know who would say, well, now that there's a test, I don't know if I'm going to get it or not. I just don't want to know. I mean, how do you deal with, artistically, a time that for a lot of people is complete ancient history?
Something that people have forgotten? Well, I mean, that touches on the last thing we were talking about. I wanted to just capture that mood and that tone. So there's not a lot of dialogue in the film, and it's not, you know, it's not a deathbed movie. It's not a movie where someone gets sick, and as we've seen in some other excellent movies. It's more just about dealing with that fear. And it's in a dance company, so there's a lot of dancing in it. And that's very physical, very sexy, very sensual, and that brings sort of the flesh to the foreground, the bodies. So I guess to answer your question, how did I deal with something that people don't know about? That was the challenge, you know, to recreate a moment that has largely been forgotten and that hasn't really been addressed in other movies on the subject.
Right. Now, would you consider yourself an actor that dances or a dancer that acts?
Definitely came into this project as a dancer who was going to attempt to act. And I loved it. Chris was incredibly generous through the whole process, and we actually worked together for almost a year before we started shooting.
I always say 6 months. Was it a year?
It was a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I auditioned dancers. I know I needed a dancer who could dance. I didn't want to do, you know, the Black Swan thing.
Yeah.
And I just found someone, which was Scott, who had an instinct for it, who was just very good naturally. And then we took that 8 months or whatever and workshop scenes, and I taught him a little acting technique, and he picked it up really quickly, and we sort of built the role together.
Right. What did you learn about yourself as an actor from doing this movie?
Well, I learned that I love it. You know, it's so different from the work I do as a dancer. So much of what I do when I'm performing has to do with what's happening right in the moment. And with this, there was so much more preparation that needed to go into it. So really picking up those techniques to prepare yourself in the same way that you would prepare your body to go on stage, learning how to prepare your
Psyche.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also something I remember we talked about was for dance, there's a way in which you're always bringing yourself back to sort of a calm center, you know, as your set point, out of which you can be wild and physical, but you have that grounding. And for the acting scenes, it was almost the reverse. Don't get calm and centered, right? You are actually anxious here.
Right, right. Well, we've been talking about it. Let's take a look at the trailer for Test.
All right.
Dance like a man. In your feet, in your hands, in your neck.
You on tonight?
I'm just warming up.
You'll go on. Don't worry. People didn't want to touch Malcolm.
But you can't get it from sweat, can you? I've been feeling a little dizzy lately.
We can do a test on your inner ear, but sometimes a virus can linger in there and affect your balance.
A virus?
There's a test for it now.
But if you had it and they found out, they could do something with the information, couldn't they? Like a quarantine or put your name on some list?
It's supposed to be.
Wow. You know, it brings me back, you know, that scene where you pull the shirt up. I remember being 24 years old and getting a pimple one night, and I was just convinced that it was Kaposi's sarcoma.
Right.
And I spent all night trying to pop the pimple.
Right.
Just to convince my, and now, you know, now I kind of laugh about that, but at the time I was scared to death.
It was very scary. Yeah, that was one of the main things culturally at the moment was markings, right? Nobody would ever talk about that anymore. It's not an issue. I mean,
Right.
if you, now we know if you're at that stage, you probably have full-blown AIDS, but we were so ignorant in those days that that was a symptom.
Right.
That was all we knew.
Well, I mean, you know, two of the most difficult things to deal with in art are sex and death, and this film deals with both.
There's a lot of sex in it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you are trying to sell tickets. I mean,
That's not why. I mean, well, I mean, the story is many things, but one of the things it also is a story about this young sexual man who's out. It's not a coming out story, who naturally wants to have sex and who is thwarted from having it for numerous reasons, but
Right.
eventually succeeds.
Right. Now, the other thing that I heard about, or I read about in this film, was that it's maybe the first AIDS film with a happy ending.
Oh gosh, yeah.
How do you do that? I mean, that's a great thing, but...
Well, I always hesitate to say that because it's risky to say that. It sounds like it could be insensitive, so I'm careful about it. But it's not about anyone getting sick. It's about the suspense and fear and anxiety about taking the test.
But it does, it ends with a sense of hope, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's about the relationships, and
Right.
so in the end, there's hope for relationships.
Right. So now, you said that you learned a lot about yourself as an actor during this. What's next? Are you going to leave the dance world and become fully an actor, or?
You know, I don't know. Chris has been trying to convince me that I need to do that. But I work with a company here in San Francisco called Levy Dance, and I'm the associate director there. And it's a labor of love, and I have no plans on leaving that anytime soon. But I am very interested to continue pursuing an acting career.
Right. What do you think is unique about the San Francisco dance community? I mean, I've worked with a lot of dance companies in my life, and you know, for me, it's incredibly vibrant. I remember those years, what, you know, San Francisco Ballet went through, some of the smaller companies, you know, watching artists like Joe Good, Deal.
We shot in his studio,
Yes,
actually. Yeah.
you know, with the AIDS epidemic. I mean, there is something special about the San Francisco dance community. Do you agree?
I do. I would say that we're a group of risk takers, like more so than any other place in the country. It's that West Coast mentality, that kind of frontier, sort of pioneer.
When you were working on this film, did you talk to any dancers from that period, from the mid-'80s, that say, God, I remember this. This is hard to watch?
Well, I was a dancer in the mid-'80s, so I talked, I mean, I was there, and the people I danced with, it was pretty easy to remember in that sense.
In our last few moments, is there anything about the film that you, without giving away the ending, that you really want people to be prepared for when they walk into the theater, or a kind of a way you want them to view the film?
Well, yes. I don't think we've seen gay male dancers before in narrative. They're the butt of jokes, like Men in Tights. It's always a kind of sniggering joke. But this is a movie that takes them seriously and gives them a story.
It's very real. It's very real.
Well, thanks for being here. Look forward to seeing the film, Dancing and Acting. I'm David Perry. You've been watching 10%. We look forward to seeing Test on the big screen. And as always, we look forward to seeing you here next week on Comcast Hometown Channel 104.